Why has the history of African peoples been erased? Well, we don't live in a fair world. Things aren't fair. You don't get equal opportunities. You get the opportunities that you create for yourself. And if someone gets in there first and they conquer you, they colonize you, they enslave you, they simply make your history disappear to make it look like they conquered, colonized, and enslaved nobodies. When people have a history, that makes you a somebody. So if you remove the history, you become a nobody. And so your history disappearing, nobody's lamenting the loss of that history. That's why conquerors, colonizers, and enslavers make the people whose history they've conquered, colonized, and enslaved disappear.
The Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Board voted against a proposed mandatory African American history class. The vote was 7-1 against the class, even though during the council meeting, 28 folks spoke in favor of the history class.
So much of our history is infused with people trying to tell themselves that they're better than another group. And when you're teaching history on an equal level, and you're prioritizing or making equal that other group, you have to then admit, uh-oh, we're equal. That's hard for a lot of people.
How many times have you heard the phrase, education is the key, education is important, or again, go to school and study, young child, that is how you will better our society. As an African, I cannot count the number of times I have heard these phrases, and I'm sure it is the same for you brothers and sisters in the diaspora, whether it is in the US, the Caribbean, etc. We've all heard this phrase, and we have to agree that this is a true statement. An educated population brings about the betterment of their society, and that has been true throughout history, since the time of ancient Kemet to modern civilizations such as China, Japan, Europe, etc. Giving the right kind of education to the population is sure to bring about a well-organized and great society. The right kind of education. Yes, you heard it right, because a people can be given the wrong kind of education. An example of the wrong kind of education being given to a population could be Africa since colonization. And this is what many a great thinker of our Afro-descendant community have noticed and have tried to fight against since they were made aware of it. We could name thinkers such as Dr. Chancellor Williams in the US or Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop in Senegal, Africa, and many others throughout the motherland and the diaspora. But there is one man in particular that has perhaps left the greatest impact in the fight to better the education of our people, especially in the historical field. This man is single-handedly responsible for making historians throughout the world study the history of African Americans and Afro-descendants throughout the world as a serious subject of history. For at the time, the consensus was that there was no history to be studied among these black peoples. This man realized very early on that the black man was being miseducated and thus left us a great work of insight that is not only relevant to African Americans today, but to all Afro-descendants throughout the world, including those in the motherland of Africa. For as you shall see further in this video, we have all been miseducated and are continuing to be miseducated to this day. This great man is also responsible for a very famous celebration held in the USA. And this celebration is Black History Month. Many of you may already know of whom I am talking about, but for those who do not know, let me introduce you through this video to the man known as Dr. Carter Godwin Woodson. And this video is about his life, his work, his impact and legacy on education and history, and the very important message he left to us. So, install yourselves comfortably as we dive into the great life of the one who is known as the father of Black history. So, the first and foremost question we need to answer, as usual in these biographical videos, is who is Dr. Carter Godwin Woodson, or Carter G. Woodson as he's known by many? Where is he from? When and where was he born? What did he do? Why is he relevant? And did he really like history like that? Lol, of course the answer to that is yes, he did like history like that. I mean, the man is literally dubbed the father of Black history, and you will know why later. Anyhow, so where does our story begin? The day is December 19th, 1875. A young boy is born to two former slaves, Anne Eliza and James Henry Woodson, in the state of Virginia in New Canton in the USA. They named this boy Carter Godwin Woodson. And yes, his parents really were former slaves, just like Chancellor William's father. Another important figure of whom we spoke about in this video you can see on the screen. But unlike Dr. William's father, who gained freedom after the Civil War and the abolition of slavery in the US, Carter G. Woodson's parents got their freedom by escaping their former masters, which led Carter G. Woodson's father, James Henry Woodson, to help the Union soldiers during the Civil War between the Northerners and the Southerners in the USA. This war is a war where, for those who do not know, the Northerners, the Union soldiers who were okay with the abolition of slavery, were fighting the Southerners who were not okay with the abolition of slavery. For you see, the Southerners thought it was their God-given right to own the so-called Negro. Yeah, the Almighty God gave them the right, so they thought, to own other human beings. And so they went to war for it, of course, as they do, because the Northerners and black people were literally going against God's will, you see? So they were right to go to war for it, defending God's will. And that was the American Civil War in a nutshell. And please, I do not want to hear anything in the comment section about how the South was just fighting for state rights and not for keeping slavery. Let's be honest here, we all know that is BS. That's like when Europeans say that they colonized Africa for Africa's own good, to give Africa civilization, morals and stuff like that. So they said, and not to steal and pillage Africa's resources. We all know that is a lot of horse crap, right? Same for the Southerners in America's Civil War. They were fighting for their state rights to own other human beings. And don't take it from me here. There are many American historians who have proven that many times over, and there are also a lot of documentation on the subject if you want to read about it. And for those who might not be into reading, there are very well done, excellently done YouTube videos on this subject that bring up evidence supporting this very statement that the South was not fighting for state rights. For people who want to get a well-informed summary of the US Civil War, my suggestion is the excellent video by the YouTube channel Knowing Better, who made this video proving why the Southerners were all about keeping slavery. Feel free to go watch it, link in the description. Anyway, the American audience already knows all this. I am just explaining this for the rest of the global audience who might not know this. So yeah, Carter G. Woodson's father was helping in the effort to abolish slavery during the war. A brave ancestor who deserves our admiration and respect. Carter G. Woodson's parents, James and Anne, got married after the Civil War, and as you could expect, they were not living in opulence. They were extremely poor, but that still did not stop them from being proud, an excellent quality to instill in their children, especially during that time when they made the black child feel like an animal. Carter G. Woodson's parents had the brilliant idea to teach their kids, be proud of who you are. You are not a slave, you're not an animal, you are a human being, intelligent, moral, strong and beautiful, and you deserve respect. An amazing lesson of pride in oneself and one's people that will later bear fruit, so keep watching the video. Anyhow, even if our young Carter G. Woodson lived in abject poverty, that still did not stop him from learning and going to school from time to time. For you see, he could not attend school all year round as white children were doing at the time. But in Carter G. Woodson's case, it was even worse. He could not even attend school consistently for a whole month because he simply had no choice but to help his parents on the farm. Not an easy life for a child in primary school, we could all concur. But he still went on and learned most subjects required for a primary school kid to learn through a mixture of self-education and the help of his uncles who could read.
That was legitness! Yeah, boy.
We're again in a case of a brilliant young boy determined to gain knowledge at all costs, no matter what the obstacles are. Even if they don't want to teach you, just go get the knowledge yourself. That is the way to go, and Dr. Carter G. Woodson is an example for us all. And despite all this hardship at a very young age, Carter G. Woodson still ended up obtaining a doctoral degree from the best university in the United States of America, and that is, you guessed it right, UCLA.
Say what?
No, I'm just kidding. Come on. It's Harvard. Of course, it's Harvard, people. Come on. We all know it's Harvard. So yes, you heard it right. Dr. Carter G. Woodson obtained a PhD in history from Harvard University in the year 1912. And guys, this is a huge thing for the time, because at the time, there was only one black man that had graduated from Harvard, and that was, yeah, you guessed it right, W.E.B. Du Bois. Or as we know him in Congo, Webb Du Bois. because that's how my teacher pronounced his name during our lessons on negritude writers. But I know it's Du Bois because apparently he wrote somewhere that his name should be pronounced Du Bois, not Dubois. Anyhow, so W.E.B. Du Bois was the first black man to graduate from Harvard, and the man to follow him in achieving this great feat of graduating from Harvard was Carter G. Woodson, the second black man to graduate from Harvard. And for those who don't realize this, Dr. Carter G. Woodson graduated from Harvard when white people were still displaying people in human zoos. Yeah, that time, when many white people still viewed the black man as a subhuman. They still believed, oh, he's closer to a monkey than to us. This was the time he graduated from Harvard. So you can see the achievement here. And of course, it's not like black applicants didn't have the brains or the want to go into Harvard and graduate from there. You have to remember, many were just in very precarious situations, since many of their parents were former slaves and their economic situation after that was simply not ideal. Like, it was horrible. With discrimination everywhere they went, can't find a job, can't enter school to get educated and later get a job, so you're blocked from everywhere, universities and all, and destruction of any successful black towns by angry white mobs like the Black Wall Street of Tulsa that was destroyed by jealous racist white people in the US, causing the infamous Tulsa massacre that they tried to bury in history. Life was extremely hard for black people in the USA, and it's a miracle they still managed to get where they are today. Yet Carter G. Woodson, in such time, still managed to get in a university such as Harvard. His achievement is a 1 in a million feat for black people of his time. And today, some American politicians like Nikki Haley dare to tell us that her country has never been racist. America has never been racist. Are you out of your mind? At this point, it's just villainy to say such kind of things. And if you're a white person watching this and you feel attacked by what I have said here, then you should perhaps reevaluate your feelings about race and how you view the actions of your ancestors, because only the racists who condone the atrocious actions of their ancestors feel attacked by what I have said here, not the people who recognize those actions and say we want to do better and we don't ever want that to repeat itself. Can we still call this ignorance or stupidity? You say that in 2024, at the age of Google, AI, whatever, you can get educated on this. It's not difficult. Has America been racist? Type it on Google. They'll tell you very quickly. The answer is yes. So I believe at this point, it's not ignorance, it's villainy. Plain and simple villainy. Refusing to acknowledge the past villainy of some racist Europeans so that it can be repeated, because if you don't learn from history, you are bound to repeat it. It's villainy. Just this year, because people in the West don't learn about colonization as a crime, as a bad action from Europe, 2 prominent army leaders, one in the USA, the other in France, are calling for the recolonization of Africa, and they might do it again if we Africans, including the diaspora, don't wake up. But especially Africans in the motherland, if we keep being the way we are right now and don't prepare for this kind of eventualities again, the bad actors in the West will take over us again. They will take over our land, they will take over our people again and make us suffer. Don't count on their democracy to stop it. Their people will be fooled again into thinking that this is for a good purpose, like last time. We need to help these poor Africans who can't rule themselves, who are so inferior. Look, they are so poor, they are in shambles. We need to help them. This is the propaganda they will run with. The French general was saying it. Look, they can't rule themselves. So many wars in Africa. So let's go in there for our own benefit. Like last time. Hell, many of them still believe colonization was a positive thing for the world. There's even a French girl who made a video saying how she's not sorry for colonization and no one in the West should be. Yes, we hear you. And for those in the West who will be like, oh, but it's not everyone. That video has like 11,000 likes, so many views. People were like, yeah, I agree with you, girl. And when they will call for recolonization of Africa, they won't feel sorry again because they don't think it's a bad thing. And so they will just allow it because the majority will vote for it because they think it's a good thing, since they don't learn the atrocious history of colonization. And us Africans, again, I cannot stress this more, we need to get ready for this eventuality because they will be fooled again. And we know the history of colonization. We know it was bad for us and we know it's still bad for us. It's still causing a lot of things. And we know it has left a lot of bad things in our continent. So prepare for the worst eventualities. Anyhow, that is why history is important. And that is why people like Sheikh Anta Diop, Chancellor Williams, and in this video, Carter G. Woodson are very important figures to talk about. Good education and great historical education are crucial to the betterment of a people. Anyhow, sorry for the long tangent. This subject touches me so much. Let's get back to the video. Where was I? Yeah, Carter G. Woodson graduated from Harvard University with a doctoral degree. But what you must know is that reaching there was not easy, because he first had to obtain a high school diploma, which was not easy either, because remember he was very poor. And because at the age of 17, in 1892, young Carter G. Woodson went to the state of West Virginia in hopes of getting into Douglas High School, a school for African Americans only, named after the great Frederick Douglass. However, Carter G. Woodson first had to work in the mines of West Virginia in order to get some money to get into school and also survive. So with mining work at 17 being very busy, young Carter G. Woodson couldn't attend Douglas High School until 3 years later in 1895, when he was already 20 years old. But being the brilliant young man he was, he managed to finish every required course and obtain a high school diploma in 1897. With that high school diploma, the young Carter G. Woodson, thirsty for knowledge, could finally attend university. And so he did. He attended the University of Chicago and obtained a bachelor's degree in history in 1907 and a master's degree in history again in 1908. And then he subsequently went to Harvard to obtain a PhD in history, all the while teaching in various high schools. Quite the amazing journey, isn't it? But it doesn't stop here. Keep watching the video. When he obtained his PhD, Dr. Woodson still continued teaching in high school because despite him being a doctor, racist white people at the time would not allow him to get in as a professor in the historical field in any of their prominent universities, despite him being very qualified for such a position, which led Dr. Woodson to just remain teaching French, English, Spanish, and history, of course, at various high schools, even going abroad. But a specific one he taught at for a long time was at the all-black Armstrong Manual Training High School in Washington, D.C. between the years of 1919 to 1922, of which he eventually became the principal. However, during that time before 1922, Dr. Woodson would also serve brief tenures as Dean of the School of Liberal Arts, both at Howard University and at the West Virginia State College. However, Dr. Carter G. Woodson left the university sphere and declared by 1922 that he and universities were done. Done, over, I don't want to come back here, you guys are toxic. I don't know if he said that, but that's basically what happened. Why did he do so? Because of the very many contentions with some of the white administrators of black universities and the politics they played in order to stifle the progress of black students. You know, the usual racist evil BS. And the racist BS did not stop there, because remember that Dr. Woodson is a PhD historian, right? Naturally, he wanted to join the history researcher profession and ultimately become a member of the famous AHA. That is the American History Association. But because of racist BS, again, the white supremacists that led the organization killed his hopes of ever joining because he was black. Not because he wasn't good enough, not because he hadn't done enough research, no, just because he was black. And also, it's not like Dr. Carter G. Woodson just went there and said, hey, I want to join the American History Association. Can I join? And they told him no, and he just left like that. He was not that kind of person. You don't tell him no like that, you know. And so he tried again. Tried this, that, tried to appeal here and there. They give him BS like, no, you see, you have to pay a certain fee and all that. Could you really? You don't really have money like that. Then he said, okay, I'm going to find some black historians and they're going to help me pay the membership fees and join, because you have to pay membership fees for such organizations in order to participate in their seminaries, conferences, etc. Right? It makes sense. But these anti-black academics, I swear, still played their racist games, their racist political games to block them from being admitted. So you can't win. The American History Association was a whites-only club. No blacks allowed. Or other races. Dr. Woodson also suggested many times that the American History Association give some time to study the history of African Americans, that is, the history of Africans since they arrived in America. Of course, they refused and claimed boldly that there was nothing there. Villainy, I tell you. Villainy. How could a serious historian say that a people do not have history? Anyway, so seeing no hope there, he left that toxic circle, and this further embittered him and alienated him towards these scholastic institutions, universities, associations. I'm done with you. And now, with little to no options left to him for becoming a professional historian, our brilliant doctor saw only one way to go, and that was to create a separate association for black historians like him, where they would focus on black people's history and issues. What a brilliant and bold idea. That pride his parents imparted to him has paid off. Remember, I told it was going to pay off later. Only a man with pride will do this thing. You don't want me in your group? Well, to hell with you. There's a bunch of people like me who would like to join but can't because of your ridiculous rules, so we're just gonna create our own group. Also, you don't want to study the history of my people, right? Well, I will do it myself because I'm a trained historian. And this serves as a great transition into our next chapter, the ASNLH. So before we continue, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to my friend at Rayda Design. He's a friend of mine who's an artist from Zambia. I think you've noticed this new handsome character that has been popping up throughout the video. Yeah, this is a piece of art from Rayda Design. So that's his design company. He makes beautiful pieces of art, as you can see on his Instagram page. So if you would like to support him and his work, click the link below for his Instagram page and his WhatsApp page to commission some designs. I think his work is really amazing. I myself needed such designs in order to put something interactive out there without putting my face in the video because I'm not really great in front of a camera. If I wanted to put a face out there, it would be this because it really looks close to what I actually look like in real life. Really. Shout out to my friend at Rayda Design. Check out his Instagram page, link in the description. He's really an amazing artist. Feel free to go check out his work and commission some work for yourself. For example, check out this piece of art he did for someone, Kemet King. I think the community would love to have this kind of design, so feel free. He's a great artist from Zambia. Feel free to support his Zambian brother. And if you do choose to pass by there, tell him KueliMika sent me. I would really appreciate that. So David, thank you so much for these designs you've done for the channel. You've really helped the channel and the work we do. So I'm really grateful and I really appreciate it. Back to the video. So, what is the ASNLH? The ASNLH, which stands for the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, is an organization founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1915 for the purpose of scientifically studying the history and life of African Americans, something that was incredibly neglected during his time, since, remember, according to white historians, black people throughout the world were incapable of having history. Nothing about them was there to be studied, and especially not history. Look, it's not my fault, it's the fact. How can a professional historian say this about any people? Pure villainy. Plain and simple. They're not even trying to hide it at that point, you know, because these are professional historians saying this. They know a people without history is nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. And Dr. Woodson was no fool, and he noticed this villainy and sought to fight against it. Because what he noticed about the American History Association and other white historians of his time is that they simply were unwilling to study the history of African Americans. Why? You can tell me in the comment section. I have my own conjectures on this, but I want to hear from you guys first. Why were white historians unwilling to study the history of African Americans until a black man, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, literally forced them to do it? Why? Let us know your opinion in the comment section. As for my opinion, we'll get it in another video, right? It would be a great subject to discuss. Anyway, comment below, and while you're down there, please help the channel grow by subscribing and leaving a like on the video, on a comment you like, or anything. Feel free. And if you're new here, feel free to join the KueliMika family and help the channel grow for more videos like this. Videos like analyzing our past or past actions and great figures from our past that deserve more attention. So, as white historians were unwilling to study African American history, Dr. Woodson took it upon himself to regroup a bunch of African American scholars, especially historians, and form the ASNLH in order to study African American history and life, and at the same time give a platform to African American historians like him whose work had been long ignored by the American History Association and the greater American public. Now, the question is, how the hell did he do it? How the hell did he create such an organization? Let's get into the story. Don't click off the video, I'm right about to tell you. So, to create an association that would rival the American History Association and do a thorough job, if not a better job, at gathering knowledge about the history of African Americans scientifically, one would need money and lots of it, because you would need to fund the research for such big projects, pay the researchers a living wage for it, the travel fees, the rent fees for the workers when they are on the field trip, the rent fees for the office, buy materials, pay for trips, organize conferences, etc. It's a huge and expensive thing to create an association, guys. And Dr. Woodson knew that, and so he needed money. But where could he get that much money? Since he himself was living on a teacher's salary, he needed to look outward for his source of money, and so he first turned to his people, African Americans themselves, who managed to contribute some money, but that wasn't enough. Because let us remember that this is a few years after slavery. African Americans simply did not have enough money to fund such project. They scarcely had any millionaires that could give enough money to this project. But the few black philanthropists there were did give something, however much they could, of course, but it wasn't enough. And it also wasn't enough to get membership fees from the few black scholars there were to fund the association. And so Dr. Carter G. Woodson turned to the richest people in the land, white philanthropists like the Rockefellers or the Carnegies. Fun fact about the Rockefellers, the patriarch of the Rockefellers at the time, John D. Rockefeller, immediately refused to fund such a project, but was later convinced by a white historian to do so. And the Rockefeller Foundation gave no less than $25,000 to match what the Carnegies had given willingly. And this is big money, guys. It's not $25,000 today. This is $25,000 in the 1920s, which is equivalent to $500,000 today. Yeah, inflation is a real thing. Anyway, so the white historians were not all bad. This one helped us, right? Let's be nuanced. This is history. There are good and bad people in every population. Anyhow, I know some people would question getting funding from such foundations such as the Rockefellers, since these often come with strings attached to them, like telling you how you should run things and so on. Suggestions like, oh, you know, you should not talk about it and rather talk about this, so why don't you put this there? But what would surprise you, and what I was also surprised to learn while reading through the materials of the history of the ASNLH, is that Dr. Carter G. Woodson did not let anyone bully him. That's right, because he never let anyone tell him how to run his association. A condition to accept the donations was that the donators would not be involved in how the organization is run. They would just donate money and let things be run by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. So he did not let anyone bully him, especially not billionaires funding him. So you gotta give him respect for that, because how many of us bend for large sums of money? Many. The moment you tell them, I'm gonna donate 200,000, but I want that guy out of your association. You got it, sir. Not Carter G. Woodson. He was different. And so he refused all quote-unquote suggestions of the philanthropist foundations on how to run the association and what to write about and what not to write about. For you see, these rich white people, when they give you money, it always comes with strings attached. So they would sometimes urge Dr. Carter G. Woodson to drop a subject for another, or simply leave research of African American history into the hands of quote-unquote more competent white historians who had more knowledge and experience. Lol. The same white scholars who were just a few years ago saying, hey, we can't study your history because there is no history to be studied there. But Dr. Woodson was unflinching. He preferred benefactors who did not meddle with the association like the Carnegies. They just gave money and were like, cool. And this caused him to lose some funding, even from the Carnegies, because one white scholar was like, oh man,
this Dr. Woodson is not to be trusted. He's not letting me be a leading researcher in his association.
And the Carnegies were like, oh, that's not okay. But there was one other white scholar who was like, hey, no. This, what Carter G. Woodson is doing is great work. He's serious, he's dedicated, and I understand him why he would not want white scholars to be there. And the white scholar was like, I think it's better for black scholars to do this themselves, especially in field research. So the Carnegies came down, the Rockefellers also came down, and everybody left their money there. One of the biggest drama that happened and caused withdrawal of major funding. Because here is the statement from Carter G. Woodson that really pissed them off, was when Carter G. Woodson said, and I quote, while the association welcomes the cooperation of white scholars in certain projects, it proceeds also on the basis that its important objectives can be attained through Negro investigators who are in a position to develop certain aspects of the life and history of the race which cannot be otherwise treated. He concluded, in the final analysis, this point here is rather that Negroes have the advantage of being able to think black. I completely agree here. A wise decision. See people, you're welcome to study the history of any culture you wish, but don't get surprised when the people, the natives of the culture, come to let you know that your analysis is wrong, ignorant, and biased. Anyhow, I believe that the best source for the history of a culture is from scientifically trained historians of that culture. Outsiders' insight is welcome, but they are not to be the main source because of the cultural boundaries. The study of the history of a people should ultimately be the responsibility of that people, and that is how everyone thinks. Plus, who would care more about the history of a people more than the people themselves? And who would understand it even more than the people themselves who understand the culture, since they are the descendants of the very culture they're studying from the past? That's how everyone moves. You don't see a bunch of Arab or Korean historians being put on the sidelines because a Western scholar wants to study their culture. Also, I wouldn't trust a person who views me as a fifth of himself to be the one telling me about where I come from, especially the very same person who said I have no history. If I leave the study of my history in the hands of such a person, he is bound to come back with some similar villainous nonsense, just to make me feel inferior to him, the history of a fifth of himself. If he finds any history that goes against his views, he's gonna rationalize it with, oh no, this is an addition of another population that came here and somehow gave their knowledge to these people, because how could a fifth of a human being achieve these great feats that are greater than the human being himself? Like what has happened in the history of Africa. Letting Europeans tell us about our history, then the same people come, they find Great Zimbabwe in the middle of Africa, in the middle of black people, and they come with the nonsensical hypothesis that this must have been a tribe from the Middle East that got all the way down here, founded this civilization, and then they vanished by some magical phenomena, and they left no trace of themselves. Only the people from Zimbabwe, the Shona, know the history of that and claim that they are the ones who made it. But the white scholars, of course, don't believe it. They're like, I thought a fifth of a human being couldn't do this. See, that's why we don't trust such scholars to be spearheading the research. It's exactly what happened to Africa for real. The European scholars made their colonizer ancestors look like angels who came to save Africa from darkness in our history books, to the point that even some Africans believe this. But of course it is less and less today. If Dr. Woodson had left this association in white hands, people in America and the world probably wouldn't know about 80 to 90% of what they know today about African American history. So again, kudos to Dr. Carter G. Woodson for his unflinching position on this point. He had such wisdom, he saw through the BS of putting white scholars as the main players in this research. He has saved us all from a lot here, so let's thank him. Anyhow, the ASNLH was doing great despite all the trials and tribulations. People all over the country were beginning to get into African American history. More and more black people had material to read about their own history, something they had been hungry for decades. And black teachers around the country started using the ASNLH materials to teach in schools. Amazing stuff. Even several prominent white historians gave support in any way they could, because we gotta remember that they were not all bad because nuance. It's just that the bad actors were too many and the good actors were too few. Anyway, many good white prominent historians, for instance, used their privileged positions to defend Dr. Woodson and the association during any controversies the ASNLH found itself in, just as in the example I just gave you. Some went even as far as to champion it and urge more white philanthropists to fund it. And this allowed Dr. Woodson and his greater team of African American scholars to uncover more about the African American past. This led to many books, articles, and papers being written specifically about African American history. And it also led to the recognition of African American history as a serious subject in the American History Association and in universities, something no one had ever seen before Dr. Carter G. Woodson. An amazing achievement never seen before. But now, was this the end for Carter G. Woodson? Was this all he wanted to achieve? Was this the end of the fight? Of course not. Now came the next step. That is, yes, we have now uncovered all this knowledge about our people and are discovering even more stuff, but is it being taught to our kids in school? Is it being taught in universities? Is the public aware of these facts? That was the next problem Dr. Carter G. Woodson set himself to solve. And this serves as a great segue onto our next point, the creation of Black History Month. So, as Dr. Woodson was working rediscovering the history of his people, he wanted this work to be more present in schools. But of course, this was not an easy task when you have white supremacists in power refusing to have your history taught in schools, because it literally goes against whatever nonsense they're teaching, like,
Oh, but the American Civil War was never about slavery, it was about state rights. But the slaves were never treated poorly, they were never treated badly, there was a lot of good white masters, there was just a few bad apples, that's it.
But you go and study and you were like, well, there was a lot of bad apples. How can you call someone who owns another human being good in the first place? Like, that is not the case. Like, good master and bad master, whatever. Anyway, So Dr. Woodson needed to find a way to get it in school, no matter what the supremacists said. And I know I said that some black teachers were already using his work in schools, but they were doing so without the approval of their principals, who were often white. And furthermore, it was not in the school curriculum. They were just teaching it as an addition, personal addition, so to speak. But with the black public becoming more and more endeared to Dr. Woodson's work, and with the rise of black consciousness movements after the Red Summer of 1920, a summer that claimed almost 1,000 lives of African Americans due to the terrorist violent actions of anti-black white supremacists, movements for black self-consciousness sprouted everywhere in the country, with great leaders such as Marcus Garvey from the Caribbean being one of the most prominent leaders in the 1920s in the USA. Hence, Dr. Woodson being seen as one of the most prominent leaders as well during that time, because he was seen as this great man who had given back his past to black people, saw the opportunity to start going around and share his knowledge about African American history with people, and thus started in 1926 what Dr. Carter G. Woodson called Negro History Week. A week where Dr. Woodson and the members of the ASNLH would go around the country, organize conferences, intellectual gatherings, as well as social gatherings, all this in order to highlight the contributions of African Americans in history, as well as highlighting certain key events in the African American past. And this was to be done annually during the month of February to coincide with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. This was a genius move by Dr. Woodson, because this weekly celebration of black history would take over every black household in the nation, and therefore become a nationwide celebration that needed acknowledgement whether the white supremacists wanted it or not. And boom, just like that, Dr. Carter G. Woodson had once again forced the white supremacists to start accepting something they didn't want. He took them where they did not want to go. Just like he did by making the American History Association recognize the study of African American history as a separate subject and serious field of study. What an amazing man. With the Negro history taking over the country like a storm, schools had no choice but to also recognize it and include it in the curriculum. So it was that some schools started focusing for a week in the year during the month of February on African American history. A first again, and this was then turned into a month by certain African American educators, and eventually many schools around the country started dedicating a month as well to this. And finally, since 1976, the US government has recognized February as Black History Month, well after the passing of the great Dr. Carter G. Woodson himself. And this was thanks to Dr. Carter G. Woodson, of course, but also it is important to stress it to the African Americans themselves, the people, the African American people who pushed for it and supported his initial idea. And of course, it's also important to remember that this movement was not without opposition, but our African American brothers and sisters were like, you can't stop us, white supremacists. We are gonna celebrate our history whether you want it or not. So, like the storm, you can't block it. You're not God. And thus was Black History Month born. A great achievement that has had a greatest impact throughout the world for generations. But now, a serious question to ask yourself, especially as an African American, is, was Black History Month where Carter G. Woodson wanted to stop? Was a mere month to focus on our history and celebrations his ultimate goal for us? Well, the answer is obviously no. Dr. Woodson wanted it to be more. Not just a week dedicated to acknowledging African American history in school, but for schools to fully integrate throughout the year the contribution of black people in history. As he himself put it eloquently, it is not so much a Negro History Week as it is a History Week. We should emphasize not Negro history, but the Negro in history. What we need is not a history of selected races or nations, but the history of the world void of national bias, race hatred, and religious prejudice. Wisdom is speaking here. Indeed, his aim was to put us back in world history because we, the black people of the world, were removed from it since slavery, colonization, and all. Our history is part of human history, just as much as Chinese, European, or Indian history. Our history is part of this great history of humans on Earth, inferior to none but equal to all. It should not be treated as separate from world history, but as an integral part of it. This is the goal. But have we achieved it? Not really. For example, in American schools, they are fighting against the idea of teaching African classical history, that is the history of the ancient African kingdoms, in their curriculum as part of African American history, or better yet, as part of American history since African Americans have been part of the country from its foundation. Since at the end of the day, that history concerns them too, with African Americans being descendants of those people. And it is important to note that the efforts to include African classical history in the schools of America are done by African Americans. They are the ones fighting to get that history into the curriculum.
You know, I was the leader of the curriculum team that wrote the curriculum framework for the first mandatory African American history course in Philadelphia public schools. Really the first public school in the country, first major school district to make it mandatory. That's from 2005, 2006. And what we had to do, people have to understand, and this doesn't make it right, but this is the logic, and reading that debate, there is something called infusion. The infusion attitude is whatever the subject, you have to infuse content from anybody involved. So, for example, if you're teaching a British literature class, understand that that means Jamaican literature, that means Trini literature, that means the blacks in Great Britain, that means the blacks in English-speaking West Africa like Ghana or South Africa. And so if you say British literature, you must infuse it with the African presence. That's one strategy. The other strategy would be to have a single class that focuses on the experiences of African people. In this case, in North Carolina, it would be African American history. What we did in Philadelphia was do both. K-8, because you don't have subjects in K-8. You do math, you do literature. You infuse black content in all of the areas. And then when you get to high school, you have a mandatory class in African American history. Finally, here was the thing that we found interesting. Then we said, since you teach world history in 9th or 10th grade, it's got to be now world history. Where are the indigenous people of North America and South America? Where are the Chinese? Where are the people who are not European who are in Europe, like the Roma or the so-called gypsies that they use the slur word? My point is this, it gets complicated in the politics of curriculum. And in North Carolina, the dodge, and I do believe it is a dodge here, is them trying to say, we really want to do infusion, because mostly what infusion means is they drop a few Negroes in February and forget them the rest of the year.
At the end of the day, what we're dealing with, well, at the end of the day, Scott, what we're dealing with are folks who want to, frankly, limit this to 28 days in February, when the reality is, if you look at the history of North Carolina itself, look, I'm born and raised in Texas. A requirement in 7th grade in Texas is to take Texas history. So to act as if you can't have a mandatory class on African American history makes no sense whatsoever.
Let me ask you this right quick, Roland. I know we got to move on. Let me ask you this. Since Texas history is mandatory in the Texas public schools, when they teach it, do they include the African presence and the Latino, Latinx presence in the history of Texas as it was taught when you took it? I don't know if you heard
Barely.
me. Oh, okay. I'm looking. Okay.
Barely.
You said
no,
barely?
but this is also why, right? But this is also why when we talk about politics, why we have to expand this conversation, because who sits on the Texas State Education School Board?
That's right.
Which controls the textbooks. See, and the thing is, and this again though, this is where I think people have to understand. You have to connect the dots between politics, power, and education.
Anyhow, while watching the news from the channel ASNLH, I was really happy to see that we're discussing this idea of including more African history throughout the curriculum throughout the year, all over the country. And of course, they spoke of the struggle it was to turn that into a reality. But I was really happy to see African American school board members fighting to include this African classical history in the American curriculum. Because as you know, most Western nations have a world history program where they mention everyone, but for some reason, Africa is always excluded, is always skipped. Except Egypt, of course, because they consider it as a non-black civilization, which is false, of course. Ancient Egypt, Kemet, was not a non-black civilization. It was a black civilization. Black people built that civilization. Check my channel for the proof on this. I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, except for Kemet, ancient Egypt, the rest of African history is largely excluded from world history curriculums. So the attitude of there is no history there is still very much alive and well. This is why the world needs people like Dr. Carter Woodson to reinstate black history into world history. My African American brothers and sisters should not limit themselves to 28 days in a year to learn about their history. And they know this already. Don't come in the comment section to tell me, we already know this, we're trying. I know there are already great actors out there fighting for this. But if you didn't think about it before, it's time for you to try to do something about it. Wherever you are. African Americans have the right to a yearly focus on their history because that is what European Americans, the white Americans, get. This is what they get. They not only get a yearly focus on their history in America, but they also get a heavy focus on the history of their motherland, which is Europe, with all the classes on classical Greece and Rome and medieval Europe. Well, I think African Americans should also get the same yearly focus on their history in America and get a focus on the history of their motherland too. For example, including the history of classical African civilizations such as Kush and Kemet and medieval Africa. And if the school boards still fight against it, well, an alternative could be creating training centers where they would teach African American history and African history throughout the year. For instance, create centers, for example, someone would be in the USA to have a yearly focus on African American history, to have a yearly focus on African history and culture and African mathematics, because there are math techniques out there from our ancestors that could make us math geniuses, but we do not use them, right? We prefer using what the Westerners have brought to us. That's their way. We could go with our way, just like the Chinese do in their training centers. While I was in China, I was really surprised by the amount of extracurriculum training centers that there were in the country. They had training centers for pretty much every aspect of learning a child could do. They had training centers for doing math in the Chinese way. Now you wonder why the Chinese are so good at math. That's the reason. They had centers for ancient Chinese poems because they have a ton of those. You're supposed to remember the lines, who said them, when you go to those training centers, that task is easier for you because training centers usually have a heavy focus and they know how to teach you that knowledge in a more fun and simple way. They have centers for Chinese language, yes, because there are these classes where it teaches you how to better your ability to pronounce Chinese characters and pronounce certain phrases and sounds. Editor's note here is called Kotaiko. Kotai means eloquence in Chinese. Kotaiko is like an eloquence class for your children to better their language ability, to better their way to speak, to enunciate phrases and their vocabulary as well. Because I remember as a teacher, I used to see my kids going to this specific class because I was an English teacher in China. I used to see my kids going to these specific classes and I used to see they would do these drills. Learn, for example, how to say the flags of certain countries and how to say the names of countries, right? And how to say the names of various animals. So such a child, his eloquence is better than yours, so obviously he will do better in a debate, right? Because he will be more eloquent, because eloquence is really that ability to speak better than other people. Yeah, so eloquence class. Anyway, they also have training centers for history nerds who would like to learn and stuff like that. So like say a parent is like, I want my kid to know about this ancient history, and there are training centers for that. So we could also create that. And I'm not saying that African Americans should move away from putting their history as a focus in the school curriculums in America, but in the meantime, this could become a good business idea too. The thirst for knowledge is there. We just need to put the taps where people could go drink the knowledge. And this also should be done in the motherland, right? The motherland also needs these training centers with heavy focus on African traditional history, traditional math, and all these techniques that would better us and better our society in the future. And those centers could also teach ancient Egyptian script to children, since it is a very popular African classical civilization. They could also learn Sibidi script, just in a fun way. Not like they learn the whole deep stuff, but they just learn the basics and what they mean, how the system works, just having fun with ancient knowledge. They could also learn the script from Ethiopia, Ge'ez. They could also learn that just to be introduced to it in a fun way, in an interesting way. So yeah, these are some business ideas that would better our societies and better our knowledge and our understanding of our people and our culture. And these should be implemented, I repeat again, through the diaspora and the motherland. Because what we get in school in the motherland, I believe, is not enough history about us. We really do not learn enough history about ourselves, because I remember in high school spending a long time on European feudal history, as if in Europe they spent any time about how the ruling system in the Molemotapa Empire really worked. They barely mention us in their history, while we in Africa spent almost a whole year focusing on their history.
So, is it a British problem or an Indian problem?
No, I think it is a British problem. First of all, because there is so much historical amnesia about what the empire really entailed. The fact that you don't really teach colonial history in your schools. Children doing A levels in history don't learn a line of colonial history. There's no real awareness of the atrocities, the fact that Britain financed its industrial revolution and its prosperity from the depredations of empire. The fact that Britain came to one of the richest countries in the world in the early 18th century and reduced it after 200 years of plunder to one of the poorest. All of that is really not known anymore.
These are clearly the residuals of colonization. We have so much history about our global people to explore that we can't afford to spend time on medieval European kingdoms for our high school children. Save this kind of stuff for the history majors in university. All these I have mentioned at length are signs of miseducation. Signs that Dr. Carter G. Woodson took the time to analyze and isolate in his major work, The Miseducation of the Negro. A great book for everyone to read. In there, he talks about the fact that black people in his time were not taught any technical skills, for instance, that could help them get a job or build for their society. This is comparable to some African countries today that have countless minerals in their soil but have no course in university about mining. That is, how to build a proper plant that runs properly. All they have is metallurgy, chemistry, or math, but nothing about how to create a processing plant that would transform the minerals, those same metals they studied about in their metallurgy course. Nothing. Miseducation. No course on how to create machines that could mine those same minerals and create wealth for the country. Nothing. Miseducation. For instance, Dr. Carter G. Woodson in his book says the following: when a Negro has finished his education in our schools, then he has been equipped to begin the life of an Americanized or Europeanized white man. But before he steps from the threshold of his alma mater, he is told by his teachers that he must go back to his own people from whom he has been estranged by a vision of ideals which in his delusionment he will realize that he cannot attain. This is exactly what happened during colonization and right after it in Africa. You had a lot of educated African men who wanted to apply European learning solutions to an African reality. This won't do. There were some great thinkers like Cheikh Anta Diop that wanted to apply African solutions to an African problem. But of course they were ignored by the very many who thought that we must do like Europe. Everything. From their laws, to their political system, to the way they run, to the way they dress, to the way they do everything, to the way they eat, to what they eat. Let's be just like Europeans in Africa. Let's speak their language, everything like they do. Let's be just like them. I do not understand to this day how it has not occurred to anyone in African governments that it's weird for a population in its own land to use a foreign language as the education language, the driving language of the country. It doesn't make sense. It's like you would go to China and then you find that all the Chinese are speaking English and their own language is a secondary. That would be incredibly weird. You forsake your own traditional languages that your ancestors created by understanding their own environment to use a foreign language that does not understand anything about your realities. It's like creating a language barrier for your people. Anyway, a subject for another video. Applying a European solution to an African reality won't work. It is bound to fail because we are not the same. We don't live the same realities. I know in the West people love to believe in the idea of universal solutions, that their solutions are universal, but this is not true, folks. Nature is diverse. We live in nature. A solution one has found might not necessarily work for all of us. This is why an education system that is designed for a people must be designed by the people from their own perspective according to their own problems and needs as they see fit. Just like Dr. Woodson, after studying his people and observing them, saw this deep need for learning about their own history and decided to have African American historians to do the work and devise a course plan for their people to study and get familiar with their history and their people. A solution by Black people for Black people. And so our education systems must be primarily designed for Black people, by Black people, with Black people in mind, with Black needs in mind, and Black solutions and educational materials in mind, with the goal of creating a well-organized, educated, successful, self-sufficient, and thriving Black societies in the motherland and in the diaspora. This is the message that I believe Dr. Carter Godwin Woodson wanted to impart to us. Educate your people by yourself and for yourself. At the end of his life, Dr. Woodson was still working on providing more knowledge about the Black past to us and to the world. He passed at the age of 74 on April 3rd, 1950. He never married and had no children. He claimed dearly that he was married to his work. A work that left perhaps the greatest legacy and impact, with his work influencing directly or indirectly great thinkers such as Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop, Chancellor Williams, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, and so on. No wonder why he was given so many honors and tributes. Thanks to this great man, Black history was recognized and respected throughout the world. He gave back to humanity an important part of its history. So, as a lover of history myself, I say thank you, Dr. Carter Godwin Woodson.